Welcome everybody. So in this video we are going to talk about physiology for different ball sports. So we have basketball, soccer, you can throw a spike ball in there, volleyball, lots of different sports. These are the sports that a lot of people play. We mostly watch these. Football you can throw in this group. And so I'm going to try and encapsulate the physiology for a lot of these sports into one video because they all have a lot of similarities and there is a lot of training that actually, or a lot of different elements of physiology that you need to be really good at these sports. So if you have any questions, make sure you ask those and I will get to those at some point. But let's switch over here and let's get started. So when we're talking about any of these sports and just general fitness overall, these are some important things in physiology that you should think about improving. So again, whatever sport you're doing, strength is going to be important. If we're defining strength, strength is how much weight you can move. So how strong you actually are. So like if you're doing bench press or squat, how many times you can move that weight one time. So typically if we're going to maximize this in the weight room, let's say you're already training pretty hard, you would typically be lifting really heavy for these and taking a lot of rest. So your typical rep range in the weight room for this is 3 to 6 reps. And this is where you're lifting heavy enough weight to where you can only lift it 3 to 6 times. So it is quite intense. If you think about these sports as well, we have speed. Speed is obviously an element, whether you're playing basketball or football. Whoever is going to be faster is typically going to have the advantage. So you can do sprints for this. Strength training is also going to help for this. We also have power. So power is interesting. Power is a combination of your strength times your speed. And so this is how quickly your body can react. That would be the speed element. And then your strength element of this is how much power your body can produce, or how much strength your body can produce in that short amount of time. And power is going to be probably your number one goal when you're looking at training for any ball sport, and to be honest, almost any sport in general. So we'll talk about how you can increase your power. When we're thinking about these sports, we also have agility as well. And so this is somewhat tied to power. There's a speed element and a change of direction element. So this is going to be a lot of neuromuscular work. So this is like the electrical system that fires your muscles and how hard and how quickly they fire. These are going to play a large role in that. Another thing that I'm not going to get super into, but is skill and technique. So when we're talking about this, particularly with ball sports, it's going to be very important. It's going to be one of the most important things that you're doing, because if you're playing soccer, you need to know how to dribble down the field, how to pass well, how to shoot well. So there's a lot of elements in this. I'm also adding strategy when we break this down into a week view, but this is like, plays and stuff. If you're training at a high level, you don't always need to do that if you're just playing rec ball or something, but sometimes rec ball gets intense, right? So you might need some strategy there. And then we have endurance. So you're going to need some type of endurance because typically these events are lasting over an hour. And so you do need some type of endurance there, although it might not be your highest priority. So we're going to talk about how you can structure that. First, I'm going to kind of go back and talk about these later on. But if we're looking overall at a macro view, so this is kind of like how your season is going to go, or how you would just structure your training overall. The way you generally tend to do this is, let's say volume here. So this is how much you're training. So this could be how many miles you're running, how many reps you're lifting, how many different exercises you're doing. So typically when you start out, your volume is going to be low if you've been sedentary. And then your volume is going to start to climb through your base training, through competition phase, and then it's going to drop back down when you get into that championship season. So let's draw some lines here. So maybe this is your base phase here. So maybe if you have a fall sport, you start training in the summer. This is your competition phase, let's call it. Maybe even a little bit longer. Yeah, over here we'll call this competition. And then this would be like your championship season here. So we'll call this the peak. Okay, so that's your volume. So if we're looking at volume, maybe you're doing soccer where endurance is probably a higher priority than some other sports, because you do run quite a lot during a soccer game. You're not going to be running very many miles right away. You're going to build that up. And then when you get into championship season, you're going to start bringing that volume back down. If we stay on this endurance train while we're here, you also have intensity. And adding intensity to your endurance is going to give you really good benefits. So it's like kind of the most bang for your buck that you're going to get. And typically your intensity, you want to stay low because you only need about 8 to 12 weeks of high intensity work. So once your competition ramps up, that's when this is going to really peak. And then right before peak, you'll drop down that intensity to try to get some recovery time. So that's kind of how your intensity will flow. This is some speed work, right? Working harder, some of those HIIT workouts. You don't need to do a whole lot of HIIT workouts in the beginning if you're just trying to get volume in and try to, I mean, it depends. You can do some HIIT training there early if you want, but generally you don't do that right away because you need to adjust to just running in general before you run hard. And then there's one other thing that I want to look at, and this is technique or skill, whatever you want to call it. So this is your ability to shoot the soccer ball, shoot the basketball, spike ball, whatever your skill is. And traditionally people will say technique should be down here and then rise up. I tend to think that technique should be fairly high throughout your training system or your training time and then really ramp up during your competition phase. So that's kind of how I would view technique and skill. If we are translating this volume and intensity to the weight room, so strength work is going to be pretty intense. So we wouldn't be doing strength work right away. Actually, let me, so for endurance here, typically going to keep it at a low intensity, right? So you're just doing runs or jogs or whatever, something active, so you start developing a base. You don't need to go super hard here. This area is where you get into that HIIT training. Like I was saying, if we're going to strength training, this is going to be maybe where you're doing like hypertrophy training, so high volume, maybe even muscular endurance, where you're doing lower weight, higher reps. So high reps, low weight. So you're not really focusing on your strength during your early season there. You need to develop a base before you can handle that. So typically you're going to be doing 8 reps or more. You can go up to 20 reps. You know, everybody has different goals. You can be doing push-ups in your room, however you want to do that. But typically you're going to be lower weight, higher reps, develop that form or whatever you're trying to do and just a good base. And then here, during your competition phase, you would start putting in that strength work where you're really trying to maximize your overall strength there. So higher weight, higher and lower reps we have there. And then during the end of your season, this is when you want to start transitioning over to that power phase. And this is where you're combining that speed with that strength that you've developed to create quick reactions. So you're more explosive overall in whatever you're playing, right? Volleyball, if you need to jump, that power is going to increase your jump height. So that's kind of how you want to structure that. When we're looking at technique and skill and agility, because these kind of go together a little bit, what you're doing is you're training your neuromuscular system, which I kind of talked about. And I think we should be doing that throughout the year, because if you look at studies, it's kind of interesting. If you practice more often, so let's say you're practicing 2 hours, and this is agility or your technique or your skill, you're doing 2 hours 1 time a week, so 1 time per week, or you are doing 15 minutes every day, you're actually going to get more benefit and more improvement from doing 15 minutes of this skill, technique, agility work every day rather than doing a lot of it in one day. So part of the reason is because when you go to sleep, your brain learns that motor neural pattern that you were practicing. So in my opinion, you should be touching on this a little bit every day. You can do more than 15 minutes, but you know, whatever you got to do, I would just practice a tiny bit per day rather than trying to stuff it all into one day, because it's less work and the gains are better. So you might as well do that. Some other tips that I want to talk about when I talk about agility and strength are, well, let's see here. Okay. So it's called the zone of proximal development. So let's say you're learning how to shoot a basketball and you've started from ground zero. So you're not very good at shooting. If you start out by trying to learn how to shoot 3-pointers, you are going to not be in your zone of proximal, it's called development. There we go. So you're not going to be in that zone of proximal development. What this means is that, let's say your skill level, say we have a chart here. This is skill, high skill, low skill down here. Let's say you are right here on your basketball skill level. Well, if you're trying to shoot three-pointers might be up here for skill. So you might be reaching too high, so you're not going to be maximally developing. So instead, maybe you just need to work on some layups, which are right here, right? So you want to be working just slightly above where you're at. And the same goes for if you're up here and you, let's say, you still probably need to practice your layups, but it's probably not, you probably need to add some more difficulty. So maybe you're here, and let's say this is where layups are, and this is your new level here. Maybe practicing layups while being guarded is going to be right here. So you typically want to be training your skill and your technique just barely above where you're currently at, because that's going to be where you can be successful and you can start making gains and you're not challenging yourself too much, because we know that if you challenge yourself too much, you're not going to make as big of gains. So again, trying to find exactly where you're at. And if you're not challenging yourself enough, it's the same thing. You're not going to be making those gains. One more thing on this skill and technique, because this is super interesting. So there was a study where they looked at if you dribbled a basketball with your left hand first versus your right hand and went through cone drills, right? So one group started some cones dribbling with the basketball with their left hand first, went through the drills. The other group started with the right hand, and then after doing the right hand, then they went to the left hand. So both groups did the drill left-handed and right-handed. However, the group that started with their left hand actually made more gains during the practice when we talked about skill and dribbling ability than the group that started with the right hand side. And there are some theories about why this occurred. Some people could say because maybe less people are left-handed, so it was more in their zone of proximal development, so you can make an argument for that. But what they actually found was the brain crosses over, and I believe the right side of the hemisphere uses spatial awareness, which allows you to determine where you are in space, which is really important for most of these ball type activities, right? And it turns out if you're using your left arm, you might be activating the right side of your brain more, which is working on spatial awareness. So they found that starting with your left hand, and I believe left foot would probably count. I haven't read it in a soccer I haven't read a soccer study, but this is an easy thing to throw into your routine. Dribble or practice dribbling, whether it's soccer or basketball or whatever you're doing, with your left hand first. As long as you're moving through some type of cone or spatial awareness situation, and you will actually get gains in your left and your right side more if you start with your left hand side. So that's kind of interesting, and it's a really easy thing just to throw into your workout. So just start with your left hand instead of your right. Okay, so that is your technique and skill. Again, just do it a little bit every day. Let's kind of break down some of these workouts here so you can learn how to throw them together. First, I kind of want to look at a general structure of our workouts. So when you are creating your workouts, typically you want to start with a warm-up. So no matter what you're doing some kind of warm-up. And like I said here, in my opinion, you should always be doing some type of technique and some type of skill throughout your week. So you don't need to be doing it every day, but if you're trying to train at the highest level, it's probably beneficial to do it most days. And you typically want to start with your agility or your technique, because the whole purpose of this is to be able to react quickly, and you need to be fresh and you need to be sharp in order to really do this well. So start with your technique and agility first, and then you can work into whatever your normal workout is, whether it's weightlifting or some cardio or whatever. That's kind of how I would structure that, because you're going to get more out of this if it's before than after, and you can still get a good workout in if you do this before you do cardio or your weight routine or a HIIT workout, which is cardio, or a speed workout or whatever you're doing there. So that's kind of how I would structure this, and then a cool down. So I'm not going to get into real technique with you guys because every sport's going to be different. But if you think about agility, any type of ladder exercises, any type of stop and changing direction, that's all going to increase your agility. So do that when you're fresh before you get started, but make sure you warm up first. Okay, so now if you look at resistance training, typically throughout your season, you're going to start with lower weight, higher reps, like I said. So since we're at home, you can just put an at-home workout together, if you're training for, getting ready for summer. And you can do body weight workouts, make a well-rounded routine, whatever you got to do there. Typically what you want to do is you want to start with large muscle groups. So, squats, lunges, that's a good place to start. You could also do some move to chest, some push-ups, etc. It depends mostly on your sport. If you need to gain weight, you could really go hard on a hypertrophy, which I have another video about that you can watch, how to really build muscle mass. That might be adequate or what you need for your sport. But make a well-rounded resistance training workout. Slowly though, you want to start to increase your strength. So this is where you increase your weight and decrease your reps. And the way this works is your rest also increases. So if you're really lifting heavy, let's say you're doing back squats and you're doing maybe 5, let's say back squats. Let's create a workout here. So you're doing back squats. You're doing 3 by 5. So 3 sets of 5 reps. One, make sure you have a spotter because that's going to be an intense exercise if you can only lift the weight 5 times. Back squats there. So you will take, in my opinion, you could cycle through these. Let's do bench press as well here so we can get an example. And let's say for bench press, you're doing the same thing, right? 3 by maybe 6. And we got 3 by 5 for back squat. So you could do some back squats, take a couple minute rest, maybe a minute if you're trying to work quick. But if you're really trying to get strength, you need to take a significant amount of time, between probably 2 minutes and 5 minutes, depending on how hard you're going and how fatigued you are. So I would maybe do some back squats, take a minute 30 rest, maybe do some bench because you're kind of changing up the muscle group. If you don't want to spend all day in the weight room, if you want to be most ideal and spend lots of time in the weight room, you do back squats, you sit down and rest. You do back squats again, you sit down and rest. So we do that. And then you can move to some smaller muscle groups. You could replace this with deadlifts, but then you could move to, shoulders, abs, lower back, calves. I can't spell right now. Calves, you get the idea. Another thing when we talked about power, so this is where you're developing speed into this type of workout. One thing you can do is you can pair a heavy lift with an explosive movement because it's called post-muscle activation potentiation, something like that. I'm probably wrong a little bit on that. But what you're doing is if you lift really heavy, it turns out that you're extra explosive right after that lift. So if you threw some broad jumps in here, so this is upward back squat, and then you threw some broad jumps in. So this is where you're just standing, feet flat on the floor, and then you jump as far as you can. Maybe do 3 by 3 of these following your back squats. So you lift heavy, take a low rest, do some broad jumps. Rest, back to back squat, rest, back to broad jumps. This is going to really improve your power. You can throw box jumps in there, lunge jumps, whatever you want. And then with your bench, you don't have to always pair it with something explosive, but you might want to do some Rocky push-ups. I was about to write Rocky Mountains. So Rocky push-ups in there. That'll be, again, some explosion, 3 by 3. There's all kinds of ways you can set this up. And then at the end of your season, you might want to not go so intense because the injury risk might be high and it takes a lot of effort. So you start toning this strength work back. Maybe drop this down to 2 by 3 or something like that for the strength set. And then you want to start upping your power. So your broad jumps or your box jumps, maybe now you're going to do 5 sets of 5 box jumps. So that's kind of how you can start doing that. And you can get into a lot of power, especially if you need to jump high or be explosive or whatever that is. I'm going to jump in. We have some questions and answer those. And then we're going to talk about endurance and then some weekly structure. So first question, would plyometric stretching be a good warm-up? So I don't exactly know what you mean by plyometric stretching. These that I was just talking about, broad jumps, plyometrics, Well, what a plyometric is it's using your stretch reflex. So sometimes people will step off of a box and then jump up onto another box. What you're doing there is when your muscle, so these are your muscle fibers, when your muscle fiber stretches, there's a reflex that makes it fire back harder and you become more explosive. So if I told you to jump as high as you can, you're not going to stand with straight legs and try and jump. You're going to squat down and try and explode up as high as you can to jump high. And what you're doing when you're squatting down is you're getting that stretch reflex in there. So if you're talking about doing that for your warm-up, I would do a light warm-up where you're just getting a sweat going. So it's just some cardio, maybe some easy biking. You can go through some lifts with really low weight just to kind of get a sweat going and get warmed up, because you're going to be a lot more, you want to prepare your body to be powerful and to be stretching in that way. So if I read your question right, I would do a slight warm-up before that, before you get really explosive and start jumping around and, doing a lot of that. But and stretching, if we're talking about stretching, you should be warmed up before you stretch. So good question. Let me know if I answered that correctly or if I did not, and re-ask it in a way where I can answer correctly. So what warm-up would you suggest for a weightlifting routine? So I kind of talked about that. When I go to the weight room to work out, it just depends on what I want to do. Sometimes I'll just go for a bike ride, and then I'll get in there, and then I'll just do maybe some lunge walks, maybe some light bench press, maybe some light squat, just to kind of open up and get ready for the movement. I might do a little bit of stretching once I'm warmed up too if I'm a little tight, but I don't overdo the stretching. Sometimes I jog on the treadmill. Sometimes I'll do like bear crawls and lunges and just some light movements to get warmed up that way. So anything that gets your breathing rate up and your sweat rate up is going to be a good warm-up. So just get creative and whatever you got to do to get prepared. So what kind of warm-up would provide a quality stretch? I feel like I still feel strained after a workout, even if I stretched prior. So I would not be stretching for your warm-up. I would be stretching after your warm-up. And I mean, there's a million different types of stretches to do. So let me think about that for a second here. What type of warm-up would provide a quality stretch? So yeah, I would say don't think about the stretch as a warm-up. Think about a warm-up as getting your heart rate going, getting your breathing going, and then doing a good stretch, because then that'll probably help you out very well. Yoga is pretty good. Holding your stretch for some amount of time can be good. Also doing like just active motion stuff. So just squatting down nice and deep with no weight on, and then just kind of hanging out there to try to open up your hips. Maybe do some hip circles, that kind of stuff. That's kind of how I would go about warming up through stretching. But I'd make sure that you get your body temperature up first before you start stretching. How long should we cool down after lifting weights? Good question. To be honest, I just ride my bike home. The purpose of a cool down is, do you really need it? You probably don't need it, but it does recycle blood through your system. So I do like to do something lightly active. You could do a walk. Sometimes I don't cool down, which is probably not ideal. But yeah, that's how I would think of a cool down, is you're just trying to get some new blood flow in so that you kind of cycle out some of that old blood, get things moving a little bit. And then so hopefully that leads to more recovery. Although I haven't seen a whole lot of evidence to support a cool down. So if anybody has some, send it my way and I'll check that out. Is it better to stretch before or after lifting, or after lifting / cardio? Well, you need to do it after your warm up. And then, yeah, afterwards is good because then you're warmed up. And if you're lifting or you're stretching or cardio, either one works. So, but yeah, I would preferably do just a tiny bit of stretching if you need it after your warm-up, and then I would do the majority of your stretching after you're done with your weightlifting session or your cardio, because when you're stretching, you're actually doing a little bit of muscle damage as well. So stretching can actually make you sore the next day. So I would just do that at the end, because then you've already done your damage, and then you can just, stretch, foam roll, do whatever you got to do. How many hours do you think it takes to perfect a ball skill? Okay, good question. So there was this idea about the 1,000-hour rule, or 10,000 hours. Oh, my marker's dying. Let's grab a new one. A 10,000-hour rule. And what they found is that, or the reason why this came about was because they found that the people who were the best at different activities, whether it was playing piano or soccer or whatever, tended to spend lots of time doing that activity. So we talked about, you can spend lots of time doing this, but you should always touch on it frequently, because that's going to be more effective than spending lots of time. But the 10-hour rule, it turns out it's more like a 6,000 to 7,000 hour rule is when people really meet mastery over their skill. And it also has to do with, and this is over years, right? But it also has to do with your genetics. So like me personally, I'm not explosive enough to ever be a professional soccer player. So even if I spent 15,000 hours in there, I'm still never going to be a professional soccer player, right? But if I spent 6,000 to 7,000 hours over my lifetime practicing soccer, I'd be pretty good at soccer. And it depends on your activity too, because some activities you can't do that much of just because of the recovery time. So you can play piano probably longer than you can run, although that's debatable because, you know, your hands, those are muscles and those could get fatigued. So a significant amount of time. In my opinion, if you spend 15 minutes to an hour a day, you'll probably maximize your ability if you did that. And you can take a couple days off, right? That doesn't mean every day, but that's kind of my ideas on that question. So if I were to do a cardio and weight in a workout, would it matter to do one or the other first? Good question. I'm about to get there. So let's talk about endurance first right here. So if you're a soccer player, you're probably going to be doing some more general runs, like 3, 4, 5, maybe farther runs, just to build overall endurance base. And when we look at your base training here early in your season, that's probably what you want to be doing, right? But a lot of times with ball sports, you don't need a whole lot of endurance in general. Like for a cross-country runner, you'd be running a lot more, right? But my favorite form of this is just some HIIT training. So you also get a speed element to this. So if you need to work on your speed and your endurance, HIIT training is going to be your most bang for your buck. So you're going to have to do the least amount of endurance and you're going to get the most amount of benefits. There was one study that looked at if people did 6 by 30 seconds hard with, I don't remember how much recovery. It was quite a bit of recovery, 2 minutes recovery maybe. And I believe they did this workout 3 times a week versus a group that ran for 1 hour 5 times a week. So this group definitely did way less work, right? I mean, if you did a warm up, let's say you did a 10-minute warm up, and then let's even say you did a 10-minute cool down, you're looking at 230, 5, so that's 15, 25, 35. So 35, we're talking like an hour and a half for the week there versus 5 hours. They found that this group had the same, if not better, improvements in their endurance because that high intensity spiking your heart rate up, producing lactic acid, which teaches your body how to use carbs well, and then also get rid of the metabolites so that you can keep exercising. This spikes all of that and really makes really good gains for you. So think about adding that intensity to your workouts rather than just a slow run, right? There's a place for that, but not for like everybody. So this shouldn't be your main focus. You should probably be focusing on that HIIT training. Unless you're a soccer player, then you might need more of this, maybe 2 or 3 days of this and 2 days of this. So to get to that question of weights versus cardio, let's look at this. I kind of drew out a weekly template, and this is for quite high level training. So don't think, if you're just trying to play basketball better that you need to follow all this, but this is kind of like how I would train somebody. And again, the technique and agility is always going to change. But let's just start with Monday here. So you do some type of warm-up, practice your technique, agility, do some strategy because a lot of sports are going to have different, plays or whatever and different, working with your teammates and stuff. So there's some interesting stuff on strategy. I read this study where they were just taking kids and they just gave them a soccer ball and they just said, make up a game and play, right? And they found that through play, as these kids navigated different rules and just messed around, they were actually creating really good strategies that impacted their play in the games. And they found that this unstructured play that athletes were doing was actually really good for teaching them how to formulate different strategies while they were playing in the real world. So, some unstructured strategy would be good, but then if you need to coordinate with your teammates too, you got to make plays and that stuff. So, and then your cool down. This would be kind of a recovery day, so you're not doing a whole lot there, because following that, maybe on Tuesday, if it was me in an ideal world, I would lift first before doing cardio, just because for ball sports particularly, you need to be strong and explosive and agile, And so if you do your lift first, then you're going to get the most out of that. And the negative effects of the lift, as far as like fatigue and stuff go, probably won't hit you until 24 hours later, somewhere over here. So what I would do is I would do your most intense lift on a Tuesday, maybe a Tuesday morning. And then if you're having 2-a-day practices, you could do your warm-up, some more technique and agility. And you can do technique and agility before you lift too, right? You could throw your lift in here instead of doing a HIIT workout in the afternoon. But do your technique agility, that HIIT workout, and then that cool down. So this is more of like a very high intensity day. So we're not worrying about too much strategy there. You're just getting a lot of work in, building your physiology. I would like to follow that day with another morning lift. The reason why I do that, let me show you guys on a different sheet here, is because we have inflammation cycles. And inflammation is a good thing if you don't have too much of it because it helps you improve. So let's say this is time down here, 24, 48, 72. And this is inflammation. So what happens is, if you work out right here, so let's look at, see if I can bring this in. So let's look at this Tuesday right here. Let's say this is Tuesday and you work out. You did a heavy lift and then a hard HIIT training workout. Your inflammation is really going to be skyrocketing, right? And if you've noticed, you typically get sore about 24 hours after your workout. And that's because that's where inflammation is typically peaking in most people, around 24 hours. As you get older, it's going to build more slowly and it might peak around 48 hours. But then, so you do your Tuesday, you do your lift in the Wednesday morning, right? So 24 hours out, you do another workout, you spike that inflammation a little higher. And then Wednesday afternoon and then Thursday are again just easy days. And so you have a nice almost 48-hour window where that inflammation cycle can drop back down. All right. And then we get back over to Friday here, where again you're lifting in the morning, another HIIT workout in the afternoon. Thursday here is just a recovery day. And then you get to this heavy lift, heavy HIIT training, and you're back here and you're spiking again. If you did another lift Saturday morning, then you'll spike again, and then Sunday and Monday are down days. So what you want in your week is 2 high inflammation spikes with recovery, because the recovery is when you're going to get better, and then you need to recover so you can go hard again. If you keep going hard every single day, eventually you're going to burn out. So you can't keep going hard every single day. You need that inflammation to come back down. Okay, one more thing about this setup here that I would do is, let's say you have a game coming up on a weekend, right? And so you don't want your inflammation to hit you right away. So what I would do is I would slide all of these. So I would move, because you want, well, I'll show you. So I would move this day. Oh, grab the wrong pen. I'd move this day to Monday. So pretty intense day Monday. This over here to Tuesday, which is fairly intense. We have a recovery day here. So let's just draw arrows, high intensity, recovery there. For Friday, for Thursday, we kind of up the intensity, but I would maybe back off on the lift a little bit. So maybe I'll just draw like this. So a little bit easier with the HIIT training, maybe do more sprints rather than HIIT training, a little bit easier on your lift, and then maybe just some light sprints on this day just to increase your intensity, but not very much volume, to kind of get freshened up for your game, and then full recovery on your game. So I would just shift those days a little bit, and then again, your Monday the following week is going to be another easy recovery day here. So the following week would be recovery. So that's kind of how I would structure a week if you're training for ball sports or anything. So, all right, do we have any other questions, any other thoughts? All right, it doesn't look like we do. So you guys are free to go. I will end this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll stick around for a little bit if you do have any questions.